Oh, good afternoon, everyone. So we are here to go over the expert report of that quite possibly one of the most insane deponents I've ever come across. So this would be Lively's expert, Michael Robbins, who so I uploaded my video of his deposition transcript yesterday. I found him really rude, standoffish, very unnecessarily so. Um, Yeah, interesting. And he shredded his notes. That was a revelation. Like the guy who is representing someone who has literally been rushed into court to accuse everyone else of, erasing evidence. Her expert erased his evidence. Oh, you can't make this shit up, can you? Right. So we'll go through his report. We'll just see what he has to say. All right. I'm just gonna go straight into it because it's a fairly lengthy report. So this constitutes my expert report in the above referenced action. As a preliminary matter, please note that I understand discovery is ongoing in this case, and to the extent such discovery produces information relevant to my opinions, I may supplement the opinions expressed herein. So let's look at his opinions. And I will have to read all of the footnotes because half of his report is written into the footnotes. Based on the information that I have reviewed and on my background and experience, I anticipate expressing opinions concerning the defendant's failures to follow standard practices and their own policies and procedures with respect to preventing harassment and retaliation from occurring relating to the movie It Ends With Us, hereinafter the movie or the film. These failures to take reasonable steps to prevent harassment and retaliation from occurring included defendants' repeated failures to investigate harassment and retaliation allegations raised by plaintiff Blake Lively and at times by others on the film. As to these allegations, standard practices and the defendant's own policies and procedures provided for proper investigations of harassment and retaliation allegations. Further, appropriate disciplinary remedial actions would have been taken as a result of such investigations. I've missed it. Was he already used a footnote or have I missed it? No, okay. Here, when harassment allegations were raised on several occasions, and then the footnote says, and harassment and retaliation allegations about which they were otherwise aware, no investigations took place. And he refers to Baldoni and Heath's deposition. There's another footnote. Mr. Baldoni also testified that he has never been disciplined for any conduct at Wayfarer Studios. So what? Which means that no one's complained about him. Thus, the defendants, and another footnote, I understand that there are multiple defendants here. I'm not in a position to determine which defendants are responsible for the multiple failures here. Further, I have not been asked to reach conclusions on that issue anyway. However, when I specifically refer to the studio here, I am referring to Wayfarer Studios and or any other entities involved with the production of the movie. Thus, the defendants violated standard practices and their own policies and procedures. Also, my opinion is that the studio violated entertainment industry-specific intimacy protocols. In addition to the company's policies discussed above, these protocols are also designed to prevent harassment from occurring and to ensure a safe environment for all involved. In addition, because, you can't just stop there, he's got to keep going. In addition, I intend to express opinions relating to ways in which the entertainment industry differs from most other industries/businesses with respect to issues concerning retaliation. With a footnote, I have not been asked to determine whether retaliation occurred here, nor am I in a position to determine that anyway. I also intend to describe the unique nature of the entertainment industry and how an actor's career in the industry can be affected both before and even after the project on which she is working has been completed. The background for these opinions follows. The basis for these opinions follows. And then we go into the background. According to the Wayfarer Studios website, Wayfarer Studios is an independent studio actively developing, producing, and fully financing a slate of highly original, genre-defining, and globally impactful feature films, episodic television, documentaries, unscripted series, and podcasts. Co-founded by Justin Baldoni and Steve Sarowitz and led by CEO Jamie Heath and President Tara Hanks, the studio's work highlights the power of human connection, debunking the traditional studio model by championing inspirational stories that serve as true agents for social change. Wayfarer Studios' current slate includes It Ends With Us. Okay, so there was a footnote. There was a footnote there, footnote 5. At some point, Mr. Heath came on as full producer on the film as well. The studio's headquarters is in Los Angeles, California. On its website, the studio provides a brief synopsis of the film. Lily Bloom thinks she's found the love of her life in Ryle Kincaid. However, after a troubling incident of abuse reminds her of her dark past, she must decide if love alone can carry her marriage through. Further complicating things is the return of her first love into her life, a man who she took in many years prior when he was homeless. One of the defendants here, Justin Baldoni, directed and starred in the movie along with Miss Lively. You have a footnote. Miss Lively also received executive producer credit on the film. I mean, has anyone made this guy aware that he managed to get that bumped up to full producer and then managed to get, like nearly 20 letters of support out of people for a PGA credit? She was not just an executive producer. Mr. Baldoni also was a part owner of the studio. Another female star in the film was Jenny Slate. Are we calling her a star? Alexandra Sachs was a producer on the film. Sony Pictures Entertainment Inc. was the co-financier and distributor of the film. Sony Pictures headquarters is in Los Angeles. Footnote, Miss Lively testified that Sony offered her a role in the film via her agent. Okay. Production on the film started on May 15, 2023, but was suspended in mid-June 2023 due to a strike by the Writers Guild of America. Footnote. Additionally, so the footnote says, there was a brief shutdown due to COVID from May 26th to June 1st, 2023. Shortly thereafter, SAG-AFTRA began to strike. This was the first phase of production on the film. The WGA strike ended on September 27, 2023, and the SAG-AFTRA strike ended on November 9th, 2023. The second phase of production resumed thereafter. No, it didn't. It was like months after. It was 2 months after. It wasn't. The film premiered on August 6, 2024. Then its general release was on August 9, 2024. Policies and procedures. Both Sony Entertainment and the studio maintained policies prohibiting harassment and retaliation. Both contained a complaint process resulting in an investigation. Further, both specified that appropriate actions would be taken as a result of such investigations. For example, Sony's policy against unlawful harassment required that supervisors and managers must immediately refer all harassment complaints to the Human Resources Department, Production Administration, or to Employee Direct. All incidents of harassment that are reported will be investigated. Further, the policy stated that the investigation would be effective, thorough, and impartial, and that it would be promptly undertaken and concluded in a timely manner. Then, if the company determines that a violation of this policy has occurred, it will take appropriate action to deter any future harassment. Where appropriate, disciplinary action up to and including termination will also be taken. In addition, the policy prohibited retaliation against an individual for using the complaint procedure. Sony's policy not only applied to Sony employees, but also to individuals performing services for Sony, and that all such individuals are expected to cooperate with investigations into complaints of harassment. And we have a footnote. My understanding is that Miss Lively was retained via her loan-out company to perform services on the film. Obviously, as an actor on the film and as the film's director, Mr. Baldoni performed services on the film as well. The studio maintained a similar policy. The studio's harassment provisions were contained in the studio's equal employment opportunities, anti-discrimination and anti-harassment and anti-retaliation policy. Like the Sony policy, the studio's policy prohibited harassment and retaliation. The policy also prohibited unprofessional conduct by any employee of the company. Among other things, prohibited harassment included verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature, and it included harassment that is not necessarily sexual in nature. For example, offensive remarks about one's sex or gender. The studio's harassment policy included a complaint process and an investigation process. Specifically, any reported allegations of harassment, discrimination, or retaliation will be promptly and thoroughly investigated by a qualified person in an impartial manner. Consistent with this, Mr. Heath testified he would rely on the studio's employment policies to decide on initiating an investigation into harassment allegations, among others. Further, in deposition, Mr. Heath testified that he understood and agreed that Wayfarer Studios' policy involved promptly and thoroughly investigating allegations of harassment and other similar allegations. The policy continued that Wayfarer Studios will consider appropriate options for remedial actions and resolutions. If misconduct is found, Wayfarer Studios should take prompt corrective action as appropriate. Corrective action might include termination from employment. The policy also prohibited retaliation against an individual for reporting harassment. In addition, like Sony's policy, the studio's harassment policy applied to all persons who interact with our Wayfarer Studios team, whether related to conduct engaged in by fellow employees or someone not directly connected to Wayfarer Studios. For example, an outside vendor, consultant, or production teams. However, Mr. Baldoni, a part owner of the studio, testified that he was unsure if he had ever read the studio's harassment and retaliation policy. Similarly, as discussed below, Ms. Lively testified that she was never given any kind of studio resources, for example, human resources or other, for filing a complaint. This failure was recognized by Ms. Sachs early on. Ms. Sachs testified that she was unaware whether the studio even had a human resources department. We've got a footnote. This is despite the fact that the studio's anti-harassment policy listed the individuals to whom complaints of harassment could be made, including to human resources. Mr. Heath testified he does not know if the studio's policy was provided or made accessible to cast and crew in connection with the movie. Mr. Heath further testified that the studio works with a human resources consultant who works from home and that the studio did not have a separate human resources department for the film. Further, she understood that complaints on the set would be reported to Mr. Heath even if the concerns related to Mr. Heath directly. Another footnote. It is not appropriate for an employer to require harassment complaints to be directed to the alleged harasser. As the EEOC says in its guidance below, a complaint procedure should provide accessible points of contact for the initial complaint. A complaint process is not effective if employees are always required to complain first to their supervisors about alleged harassment, since the supervisor may be a harasser. Additionally, she did not know if the studio had harassment protocols in place. So, on March 12th, 2023, Ms. Sachs wrote an email to Mr. Heath and Andrew Lieberman at Sony, among others. In it, she suggested that the studio's workplace harassment protocols should come from Sony on this show. We should do their training/Zoom before we start, and their email/hotline should be distributed to crew upon hiring. As a result, studio was aware of the need to both conduct training and to distribute a hotline for harassment complaints. And we got another really long footnote. In an apology which Mr. Baldoni distributed to a number of people, particularly apologising to Miss Sachs on February 19th, 2023, he wrote, "For this film to work, every person involved has to feel safe to express their thoughts, feelings, opinions, and concerns to me on all levels. But with the pressure I've put on my shoulders, I've not created the energy for that environment to thrive. That is going to change. One of my main focuses going forward will be ensuring that my energy and spirit match my intention here. Of course, it would not be appropriate to require harassment allegations raised against Mr. Baldoni to be raised to Mr. Baldoni. This aside, Miss Lively and Miss Slate testified that when concerns were raised to Mr. Baldoni, his response was to become huffy with them." However, Sony declined to provide such training. And while, according to Miss Sachs, a hotline number was set up, the complaint went to Mr. Heath and the studio, not to Sony. So, just a sidebar for a second. You've got all the testimony from people like Isabella Ferrer and Blake Lively going on, we didn't know about this hotline number. So Alex Sachs in her deposition has, confirmed that there was a hotline number. If people were going to Alex Sachs, Jenny Slate and Blake Lively approached Alex Sachs with their grievances. Why didn't Alex Sachs call the hotline number? I feel like everyone's pointing fingers, but at the same time, by their own testimony, everyone appears to have not adhered to something or other. Or, and I think this is the more likely option, they just didn't think, everyone, the complaints were being raised were put more as minor niggles and irritations rather than, sexual harassment. I think that's what happened. Because this report is going to completely, it goes for the jugular for both Wayfarer and Sony. Sony get an absolute beating in this report, actually, from this guy. But, he will go on and say that Lively and Slate both went to Alex Sachs. And that Alex Sachs, as a producer, he said in his deposition yesterday that she was one of the people who could be approached with concerns and complaints as the producer on the film. And this just confirms Alex Sachs stated in her deposition that there was a hotline number. But I haven't seen anything that confirms that she ever called it in response to not just Blake Lively's complaint or Jenny Slate's complaint, but also, like, she mentioned her own niggles with Justin Baldoni, with him shouting or, slamming his hand down on chairs, etc. She did not call anyone, so. Oh, okay. By contrast, Miss Slate did not recall receiving an email or hotline to raise concerns, and she was not aware of any HR department at the studio. However, sexual harassment training was delivered to those involved on the film. So we got another footnote. Why is he write such huge footnotes? Look at this, isn't it? Right, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath testified that the harassment and retaliation training was provided in connection with the movie. Similarly, Miss Sachs testified that the training was provided. However, Miss Slate testified that she did not recall any such training. My understanding is that the studio has not produced any record of who participated in the harassment and retaliation training, and Mr. Heath, the studio's CEO, testified that he was unable to confirm whether such records exist or who could confirm their existence. Well, surely the law firm who provided the training could confirm that. Conducting sexual harassment training is part of preventing harassment and retaliation from occurring. Miss Giannetti testified that Sony would have expected the studio to have done that. Okay. The training was provided to the studio by a law firm well known for labour and employment work in the entertainment industry, Mitchell, Silberberg and Knupp. So they're known as MSK. And we have another footnote. Good God. On a number of occasions, attorneys at MSK have hired me, and others at my company to conduct workplace investigations for their clients in the entertainment industry. Also, I have served as an expert witness for MSK clients. As will be discussed below, I will be presenting on workplace investigation issues in the entertainment industry in a program that does not yet have a date but has been confirmed. The program is sponsored by the Association of Media and Entertainment Council. One of my co-presenters is a partner at MSK. The MSK training, Respect in the Workplace, Preventing Discriminatory Harassment and Retaliation, defined harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. Among other things, the training provided examples of inappropriate behaviors. For example, inappropriate verbal behaviors include sexual comments, stories or innuendos, asking about sexual fantasies / activities, making sexual comments about someone's clothing and anatomy or appearance. Right, do you know what? That's a fair description, absolutely. But, then we would require all of the cast and crew who have been deposed in this lawsuit to be pulled up for sexual harassment. Because we have seen some of it from Brandon Sklenar. We have seen it definitely from Jenny Slate. And someone needs to reach over and grab Ryan Reynolds too. Absolutely from Blake Lively. I mean, for good God. Just... I really wonder if this guy was ever shown that the text exchange between Jenny Slate and Blake Lively talking about the reasons that she didn't like the Airbnb she was given. Or Blake Lively admitting that, her and Jenny Slate can say inappropriate things because they're women and there's a safety about that, but Justin Baldoni can't. He's not even allowed to look the wrong way. I don't know why women think that being able to do things that men can't do is equality. It's not. The equality is that either you both can do it or you both can't. Um, okay. Inappropriate physical conduct included touching, kissing, and hugging. Of course, given the entertainment industry, some such conduct would be appropriate, but only if it is necessary to the performance of the job. The training explained that a person who is offended by your conduct is not obligated to tell you before raising a concern. It further explained a person does not need to be the subject of the harassing conduct in order to have a legitimate concern, and that it is the impact that matters, not the intent. Okay, I mean that's helpful, isn't it? It is the impact that matters, not the intent. That's absolutely fair. It's also interesting that Blake Lively managed to get grapple control of the entire film, and that was the impact on her. Oh, my throat is so sore today. I think I'm losing my voice. Okay. Finally, the training action explained that the company policy provides for investigation and corrective action. That training, however, did not provide information about where or to whom to complain. So whether or not the training actually was conducted, which in my opinion would be standard practice, the studio was at least aware of the type of conduct that was prohibited, that investigations needed to be done when complaints arose, and generally what appropriate practices were in the entertainment industry. However, despite the policies and training above, when allegations of harassment and retaliation were raised both to Sony and to the studio, no investigations took place. In other words, Sony and the studio failed to follow their own policies and procedures. Got a footnote. As mentioned above, Sony's policy not only applied to Sony employees but also to individuals performing services for Sony, and that all such individuals are expected to cooperate with investigations into complaints of harassment. Here, the studio was performing services for Sony as a distributor and financier. Further, both Mr. Baldoni and Miss Lively were performing services on the film. Sony's policy was to conduct investigations when it became aware of harassment and retaliation allegations relating to those who were performing services for Sony, yet Sony conducted no investigations there. Um, Further, the studio failed to follow the training that was delivered to those involved in the film. Interestingly, in his deposition, Mr. Sauer seemed to refute the clear statements contained in the studio's policy with respect to when the studio would conduct investigations into harassment complaints. As mentioned above, the studio's policy was clear. Any reported allegations of harassment, discrimination, or retaliation will be promptly and thoroughly investigated by a qualified person in an impartial manner. However, in deposition, Mr. Sarowitz's position seemed to be that investigations would only occur when a formal harassment complaint was raised, and his view was that formal meant a complaint made to Human Resources or through SAG-AFTRA. Okay, footnote. Mr. Baldoni was unsure whether an official HR complaint needed to be made in order for an investigation to result. However, he agreed that the studio's policies could be violated even without an official HR complaint, and that supervisory responsibilities under the studio's harassment and retaliation policy applied regardless of an official HR complaint being filed. This explains one reason why the studio failed to conduct any investigations into multiple harassment complaints. including those raised directly to Mr. Heath and Mr. Baldoni. Specifically, since no complaints were raised to Human Resources or to SAG-AFTRA, no investigations were conducted. I agree with that, right? No one did contact Human Resources, that's fair. But I am glad he's pointed out that no one contacted SAG-AFTRA, which Blake Lively absolutely could have done, and she didn't. Of course, Mr. Sorowitz's interpretation is contrary to the clear language in the studio's employee handbook, a handbook with a cover page signed by him. It is contrary to standard practices as well. Another footnote. Beyond this, it appears that the studio did not make its human resources department available to cast or crew on set. Further, most employees working for the studio and most working on the film were not covered by a SAG-AFTRA contract either. For example, Miss Sachs raised complaints about inappropriate behaviour on the film. As a producer, she was not covered by the SAG-AFTRA contract. Okay, most working on the film were not covered by SAG-AFTRA contract. That's fine. Blake Lively was. So was Jenny Slate. And so would have been Isabella Ferrer. Um, where is it? Beyond, so just to read that first line again. Beyond this, it appears that the studio did not make its human resources department available to cast or crew on set. Again, did anyone ask? Do you know? I don't know whether it's something about Hollywood actors who feel like they should be spoon-fed everything on, a silver spoon. If I was in and I have been in a situation, I've had to take action against an employer for discrimination. If I want to make a complaint, I can use the words. What is it? How can you give me your complaints procedure? If I don't know who to contact in HR, which is extremely unlikely given that, the whole process of doing some kind of work for a company involves some kind of negotiation with HR, then I can ask, who is there any evidence that Blake Lively, Jenny Slate, Alex Sachs, anyone even so much as said, who can we contact at HR? I can see some of the argument that, there was policies in place which, like, well, if concerns are raised, then it should trigger an investigation. I get that, right? But there is dispute over the complaints that were raised, i.e., Blake Lively saying, "Well, I raised, sexual harassment complaints, so therefore that should have automatically triggered, you know, whole the whole investigation, etc., etc." Right? Wayfarer saying, "Well, hold on. You complained about the first AD, Judy Bloom. You complained about COVID on set. You mentioned that Justin said, that you looked sexy, or your character's wardrobe looked sexy, and that in this, we apologize. We thought the matter was dealt with, kind of thing." But I have seen absolutely no evidence of anyone, whether it would be from Blake Lively and Jenny Slate, or anyone dealing like Alex Sachs and Giannetti, saying, "Oh, here's the email address of Cynthia Barnes-Slater. She's HR." Or I haven't seen anyone ask for a HR contact. There's been no one has actually said, "Oh, yeah, Blake Lively asked for the contact at HR." In fact, our 17-point letter specifically said, "I'm willing to stipulate to this agreement on the, and forego a more formal HR process." So, there would have been nothing that would have triggered in my view, Wayfarer to sit and think, okay, we need to do an investigation because Blake Lively was willing to forego that, her own words. Um, but I think it's quite an important point to sort of to say, well, yeah, okay, maybe there were some obligations and responsibilities on Wayfarer, on Alex Sachs, on Sony to have, upon hearing X, Y, and Z from either Blake Lively or Jenny Slate, maybe a process should have been triggered. And it wasn't. And that's one argument. But also the other argument is Blake Lively did know how to contact HR. Did she? No. Did she email? No. Did she ask her lawyer, Lindsay Strasberg, who drafted her ACTA loan-out agreement and the 17-point list? Did she go to her and say, "Oh, can you please put something in writing, like a cease and desist to the company? Say, look, my client is unhappy and has experienced this, and this." No, not until it benefited her. Did anyone else say to Blake Lively, "Oh, yeah, here's how you contact human resources"? No. Did anyone ask Jamie Heath or Justin Baldoni or Steve Sarowitz for a contact at HR? No. And then we have the whole SAG-AFTRA of it as well. Did anyone contact SAG-AFTRA? Any members who happen to be working on film? Blake Lively, I'm looking at you. No. These are important things, right? There has to be a bit of proactivity here. You can't just sit on your backside, say something to one person and not kind of follow up with that and say, "Oh, I raised these concerns to you, Ange Giannetti or Alex Sachs. Can you tell me what, have you put them up the chain? Like, have you contacted anyone, or can you put me in touch with someone, the right person, please?" And most people will, if they don't know the answer, if they know the answer, they will say, "Oh, yeah, no, this is what you do." Or if you don't know the answer, you say, "I'm not sure right now, but I will go and look into it and I will get back to you, by the end of today or tomorrow or whatever." That's how most people function in society. There seems to be like a whole alien environment going on in Hollywood, which makes no fucking sense, but nothing is their fault. It's everyone else's fault. Any problems that are not resolved, if they have, because they for some reason they don't appear to want to resolve the problem themselves, they expect the problem to just be resolved for them, and it's weird. It's just weird. Right. Oh. Okay, we continue. So I wanted to get that blanket statement out because I know I'm going to get myself kind of wound up as I go through this. I can feel it building already. That, like, it's just, oh well, have Wayfarer done this? Have Wayfarer done that? And I get that there is responsibility on them, and he is putting joint responsibility on Sony as well. But Sony aren't being sued, firstly, which is inexplicable if what he's putting in his report is correct. But there has to be some kind of, you know, activity coming from Blake Lively. This could have been simple little things that would have absolutely tightened up her case to say, "Look, I tried everything. No one was listening to me. Here's the paper trail of all the efforts I made to try and, reach out to someone to raise my concerns because I was that concerned." Going for lunch with Alex Sachs is not the way to raise a complaint, Jenny Slate. Right. Okay, we continue. For example, in its enforcement guidance, vicarious employer liability for unlawful harassment by supervisors, the EEOC writes that employers have an obligation to exercise due care to prevent harassment from occurring. We've got a footnote. This is the 2010 guidance. An updated version was promulgated on June 6, 2024, as to the establishment of an effective policy. The elements delineated in the 2024 version basically are the same as the 2010 version, though more extensive. Part of exercising due care is to conduct workplace investigations when complaints arise. Additionally, it states that this applies regardless of whether a complaint was framed in a way that conforms to the organization's particular complaint procedures. Further, due care requires management to correct harassment regardless of whether an employee files an internal complaint. Similarly, in conducting effective independent workplace investigations in a post Me Too era dispute resolution journal, the authors write that employers need to investigate when employees submit a written complaint, but also when verbal allegations are made. Investigations are also commenced when complaints are made anonymously and when management and/or those in HR compliance roles directly observe problematic conduct. And that's an interesting point. Directly observe problematic conduct. Um, I do find it a bit wild that I, yeah, no, I'm going to say this. I find it wild, right, that the allegations that against Justin Baldoni, in particular, the vast majority of them happened on set in front of dozens of people whilst cameras were rolling and recording everything. And yet Alex Sachs she was there, but she still had to be taken to lunch to be told about it all. Like, how did she not know she was there? And on the theme that, because most sexual harassment, right? Like if you're in an office, you know, most sexual harassment from a male boss to a female employee happens covertly. It's a quick brush up as you're walking past each other in a corridor. It's following the woman into, like, when she goes into a supply closet, following her into that closet and then closing the door behind you to make it difficult for her to get out and only letting her out on certain conditions. It's calling her into your office. It is not blatant, "Oh, you look sexy," in front of the entire office. But and I think the other thing that really bothers me, right? And this kind of ties in as well with the video I did on Ryan Reynolds' text messages, like how he overheard the whole discussion about the circumcision before Blake Lively signed onto the film. Ryan Reynolds overheard that discussion and still 2 months later wrote a long-winded kind of text message to Justin Baldoni telling him how much he adores him, right? But like for me, I guess what the bit that kind of really, really bothers me about all of this is how many times did Justin Baldoni go to Blake Lively's penthouse to work in her office in Buckingham Palace, as she calls it, yeah? And they were alone, where they were going through scripts or like mapping out scenes or whatever, or making decisions, right? There was they took a private flight to Los Angeles together and back. How come this guy who's harassing her in front of everyone at every opportunity he can, there's no instances of anything happening when it's just the two of them, pretty much? That's just my thought process. But yeah, what he says here, about the kind of responsibilities on people who directly observe problematic conduct. Alex Sachs was on set where the harassment kept taking place, allegedly, and still had to be taken out for lunch to be told that it was going on, even though, you would think it was happening right under her nose. It this is why this does not line up for me. It doesn't it's not that it just doesn't follow the traditional, typical kind of way of sexual harassment. Because most harassers will try to do things kind of covertly, so that if their target then does turn around and accuse them of anything, they can say, "I didn't do that. I don't know what you're talking about." And then it becomes a he said, she said, right? What they don't do is do it in front of, a room full of witnesses and, cameras that are picking up everything visually and audibly. Okay, we continue. Additional information about standard practices for responding to complaints of harassment follows. So, standard practices. Standard practice is to take reasonable actions to prevent harassment and retaliation from occurring. In my opinion, there are 4 basic prevention steps. 1. Promulgate, maintain, and enforce good harassment and retaliation policies. We have a footnote. Good harassment policies mean policies that are consistent with standard practices. 2. Conduct harassment and retaliation prevention training. 3. When harassment and retaliation allegations arise, treat them seriously and conduct an adequate investigation. And 4. Take prompt and appropriate disciplinary and/or remedial action based upon the investigation. And we have another footnote. As discussed below, there are additional steps that exist in the entertainment industry when the relevant project involves intimacy scenes. Consistent with these 4 steps, the EEOC, in its enforcement guidance, vicarious employer liability for unlawful harassment by supervisors, provides a harassment prevention guide for employers. It generally is necessary for employers to establish, publicize, and enforce anti-harassment policies and complaint procedures. Failure to do so will make it difficult for an employer to prove that it exercised reasonable care to prevent and correct harassment. An employer should provide every employee with a copy of the policy and complaint procedure and redistribute it periodically. Other measures to ensure effective dissemination of the policy and complaint procedure include posting them in central locations and incorporating them into employee handbooks. If feasible, the employer should provide training to all employees to ensure that they understand their rights and responsibilities. An anti-harassment policy and complaint procedure should contain at minimum the following elements: a clear explanation of prohibited conduct, assurance that employees who make complaints of harassment or provide information related to such complaints will be protected against retaliation, a clearly described complaint process that provides accessible avenues of complaint, assurance that the employer will protect the confidentiality of harassment complaints to the extent possible, a complaint process that provides a prompt, thorough, and impartial investigation, and assurance that the employer will take immediate and appropriate corrective action when it determines that harassment has occurred. Like both Sony's and the studio's policies and procedures, standard practices are to conduct investigations into complaints of harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. For example, the EEOC writes in its guidance, an employer should set up a mechanism for a prompt, thorough, and impartial investigation into alleged harassment. Similarly, in Investigating Workplace Conduct Investigators Guidebook, Equal Employment Advisory Council 1999, the Equal Employment Advisory Council writes, whenever an agent of the company, i.e. officer, manager, or supervisor, receives a complaint or other information indicating a possible violation of law or company policy, the company has a responsibility to investigate. All complaints involving possible violations of law or company policy regarding discrimination, harassment, and/or other standards of conduct whether presented formally or informally, in writing or orally, should be taken seriously and investigated. Even if there has been no actual complaint, the company's responsibility to investigate is triggered if an agent of management observes, hears, or receives information about possible harassment or other improper conduct affecting an employee's work environment. In the Workplace Investigations chapter, in advising California employers and employees, the authors write, once an employer receives an employee's complaint of harassment and presumably a claim of any other type of unlawful employment practice, the employer has a duty to take prompt action to investigate and, if warranted, correct the behavior. In the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing Workplace Harassment Guide for California Employers, the California Department of Fair oh God. The California Department of Fair Employment and Housing writes, if there are allegations of conduct that, if true, would violate your rules or expectations, you will need to investigate the matter to make a factual determination about what happened. That is now the Civil Rights Department, California Civil Rights Department. According to the footnote. In one of my own articles, I write, by now, California employers are well aware that upon learning of an employee complaint of harassment, discrimination, or retaliation, whether formal or informal, it is incumbent on them to conduct a prompt, thorough, and impartial investigation. So he's citing himself, but what he's done is rehashed someone else's work. He's basically taken, the other sources he's quoted. He's written something himself at various points, but he's citing himself as a source. As discussed below, multiple complaints were made both to Sony, then relayed to the studio, and also to the studio directly. But despite the studio's policies, the harassment training delivered on the film, and standard practices, no investigations took place. The studio failed to enforce its policies and its training materials, and the studio failed to take reasonable steps to prevent harassment and retaliation from occurring. Beyond all of this, Ms. Lively was given no information about how to file complaints of harassment or retaliation. In this additional way, the studio failed to take reasonable steps to prevent harassment and retaliation from occurring. In addition to the above, in the entertainment industry, there is another important step in preventing harassment and retaliation from occurring. Okay. Footnote. This is one of the unique aspects of the entertainment industry, as few other industries involve nudity or visual oral sexual content. This step concerns productions that involve nudity and other intimacy scenes. This is part of creating a safe, harassment-free environment for those involved in such scenes. And there's another footnote. I know there are some people who are like Leanne, scrolling up and down the screen. It gives me a headache, and I fully get that. It gives me a headache too. I'm sorry. I have to do that to look at the footnotes at the same time. So footnote, as SAG-AFTRA says in its quick guide for scenes involving nudity and simulated sex, producers are legally and contractually obligated to provide a workplace free from sexual harassment at all times. Oh, interesting. Is this guy aware that Blake Lively was a producer? Like a PGA producer? Including providing training and mechanisms for reporting inappropriate conduct. There are two aspects to this. First, in advance of any scene involving intimacy, the actors involved in intimacy scenes should be provided with and then sign a nudity rider. The nudity rider. Let's get into why it was important for Blake Lively to sign her nudity rider. A nudity rider should include specific and detailed descriptions of the exact nature of the nude, semi-nude, sexual or love scenes, including including simulated sex, simulated nudity, and other simulated intimacy scenes involved in the project, along with a detailed explanation of the relevant nature of the attire involved, if any. We have a footnote. For example, see-through clothing. I wonder if that also includes color changing, modesty patches over genitals. The nudity rider, I'm joking by the way, I'm being facetious. I do know it does cover modesty patches. Does it cover pairs of black shorts though? Is the interesting question. The nudity rider should also include any other relevant information required to fully disclose the nature of the intimacy required. Additionally, the nudity rider should specify if and then when a body double will be utilized. Also, the studio or production company should make sure that there will be a closed set when scenes involving nudity are filmed, and that the actors involved in the scene are informed about who will be on set and who will be on the monitors. All of this is to ensure that there can be no dispute or misunderstanding about what is contemplated. The nudity rider should be presented to the performer in a way so that the actor in a position to make an informed decision as to whether to agree to perform in this scene as requested and in the project. Oh, look, another footnote. SAG-AFTRA says the rider should be presented at least 48 hours prior to the filming of the scene. Blake Lively received hers weeks before she filmed the scene. Second, an intimacy coordinator should be on set for any scenes involving intimacy, including nudity, and such scenes should be shot on a closed set. Again, all of this is part of creating a safe, harassment-free environment for those involved in the production. However, significant problems existed with respect to both of these additional industry-specific standards which are designed to provide a harassment-free, safe workplace. Oh, really? I'm curious to know what significant problems he felt existed. The specific failures to prevent harassment and retaliation from occurring, as well as the failures relating to the industry-specific standards, are discussed below. Complaints and failures to investigate. On May 23rd, 2023, Miss Lively had a conversation on set with Mr. Baldoni. During that discussion, she spoke to Mr. Baldoni directly, making it clear that he had crossed the line with her. This related to his inappropriate sexual comments directed toward her. Let's see. Footnote. The timeline exhibit attached to the Sarowitz deposition seems to confirm Miss Lively complaining that Mr. Baldoni made sexy comments. Ugh. I wonder if this guy has seen the video of Blake Lively telling male co-workers, crew members, that her boots were sexy. How do you feel about that? Do you think her boots are sexy? Miss Slate was in this conversation as well. During the discussion, Miss Slate chimed in, trying to explain to Mr. Baldoni how uncomfortable it can be when you are getting unwarranted comments. Another footnote. Mr. Baldoni confirmed Miss Slate talking to him about this comment. However, he did not believe that any of Miss Slate's concerns were presented to human resources at the studio. But instead of ceasing his inappropriate behaviours, Miss Lively felt that instead Mr. Baldoni was trying to justify and backpedal. Confirmation that Miss Lively's complaints were raised that day can be seen from the defendant's first amended complaint. Additional confirmation can be seen in a text exchange of May 28th, 2023. I wonder if this guy saw the text exchange between Lively and Baldoni that day, saying that she was very proud of the great work that they'd done and how fun and, amazing everything was. In that text exchange, Mr. Heath and Mr. Baldoni wrote about communications with Mr. Sauerets. Mr. Heath wrote, I talked to Steve last night. I didn't share about the comments the ladies had feelings about. Didn't want to share anything you hadn't yet. Mr. Baldoni responded, I shared with him today. Instead of responding that the studio should enforce its policy and conduct a workplace investigation, Mr. Baldoni continued, he said he should come to sit and remind Blake whose money this is, and I said that's not the best idea. So despite the studio's policy, standard practices, and the training, all of which called for investigating harassment allegations, no investigation took place. And I'm not gonna, do you know what? I'm gonna give it to this guy. It's not a good look when, it's not a good look when Justin Baldoni is saying, oh, look, I said this, and the girls didn't like it. And Steve Sarowitz responds with, well, let me just, fly over there and remind her who's paying her wage. That, I don't think it was meant in that sense. And he obviously was not the one, doing the harassment. He was nowhere near the set. But it doesn't look good. And that is the typical kind of response you would get from, a boss in a real life situation, like an office environment where, like a boss nudges his pen off a desk and then tells his female employee in a short skirt or something, like, can you bend over and pick that up for me? So that he either gets a flash of a kind of bum or her cleavage as she bends down, and her saying, "No, I don't want to do that," and then him saying, well, don't forget who pays your wages. You do what I tell you. That is kind of one thing that could be problematic here. And I adore Steve Sarowitz. And there's many statements that have been attributed to him that have been, amped up to be something that they turned out not to be at all. But when you are going around and kind of dismissing, you're being told, oh, look, these people weren't happy. Whether you think the complaint is frivolous or not, the response is not, well, I pay their wages. Should I come over and remind them that that's not the right response in any scenario by any person at all? So I know people, may not agree with me there, but I don't think that when you've got it in black and white and it's now in this scenario, it would have been better to just not say it at all. Okay. So, despite the studio's policy, standard practices, and the training, all of which called for investigating harassment allegations, no investigation took place. A few days later, on May 26, 2023, Ms. Lively raised a harassment complaint to Andrea Giannetti. We have another footnote. At the time of her 2025 deposition, Ms. Giannetti was the Executive Vice President, Production and Senior Creative of Columbia Pictures and Sony Pictures. She testified that Columbia is a label owned by Sony Pictures. Great. The complaint related to harassment both by Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. Oh, another footnote. Fuck. Right, they're talking about Josh Pearl, who is obviously Jenny Slate's agent. He's a talent agent at CAA. According to Miss Lively, when she spoke to Miss Giannetti, she shared some of the harassing incidents with Miss Giannetti, which she had endured on the set. For example, she explained that Mr. Heath had approached her, asking if she had a minute for him to show her something. So Lively did kind of confirm that, the way she wrote the showing of the birth video in her complaint, it was like Jamie Heath had literally come up behind her and ambushed her and just shoved a phone screen in her face. But he did actually say, oh, he may not have said what he wanted to show her, but he did say, oh, can I show you something? Oh, right. For example, she explained Mr. Heath had approached her, asking if she had a minute for him to show her something. He did so without explaining what he wanted to show her. Then Mr. Heath showed Miss Lively a video of a naked woman, apparently of Mr. Heath's wife, nude, giving birth. And we have 2 footnotes for that. Hold on. I'm confused now. Right. According to the timeline exhibit attached to Sarah's deposition, the video was shown on May 23rd, 2023. And then the next footnote, in deposition, Mr. Baldoni admitted asking Mr. Heath to show Miss Lively the video of Mr. Heath's wife giving birth. Again, the wording, giving birth or after she had already given birth. Now that is up for dispute. In deposition, Mr. Heath admitted that in the video, his wife was nude from the waist up, but in water. Miss Lively also explained to Miss Giannetti that the people who were in charge of the film were misbehaving and that she felt she had nowhere to go. Again, SAG-AFTRA. Her lawyer. But Miss Giannetti told Miss Lively that she could not file a complaint through Sony because Sony did not run the physical production of the film. Instead, Miss Giannetti told Miss Lively she had to file her complaint with the studio. Another footnote. Miss Giannetti testified that the studio was responsible for handling human resource complaints related to the film, though she did not know if anyone from the studio was assigned to human resources for that purpose. And are people incapable of asking? Right. In deposition, Miss Giannetti confirmed that Miss Lively raised complaints to her on May 26th. This was via a phone call that may have lasted 45 minutes. Specifically, Miss Lively complained about Mr. Heath showing Miss Lively the video of his wife nude giving birth. Also, Miss Lively conveyed her discomfort about Mr. Heath entering her trailer when she was in a vulnerable state of undress. In addition, Miss Giannetti testified that Miss Lively might have raised issues about unscripted physical interactions she had with Mr. Baldoni. Miss Lively's notes of the May 26th conversation not only show the complaint about Mr. Heath entering Miss Lively's trailer, but also Miss Lively relaying that Mr. Baldoni was inappropriate towards her and to others. Another footnote. Further, Mr. Baldoni, further via Mr. Baldoni, Miss Giannetti understood that Miss Lively was upset about a comment Mr. Baldoni made about Miss Lively's weight. He didn't make a comment about a flipping weight. He just asked how much she weighed. He didn't comment on it. I find it absolutely wild, right? This guy is, so experienced in the industry of employment practices, but yet can't seem to grasp the fact that employers, or we'll just stick with him. For the purposes of going through this, we'll just stick with employers. But it is perfectly reasonable for an employer to inquire about an employee's weight when there are potential health and safety or risk assessment issues. Oh, good God. This is going to be one of those documents, I think. Still got a lot of it to go through. I might have to split this into 2 because this is 52 pages. Hold on. Alright, actually, I just had a little look there. Yeah, so we're kind of 14 pages in, but we actually got only another 10 pages of his actual report. The rest is him, waffling on about his qualifications and the various trials he's testified in previously, etc. So I'm not doing all of that because it's not relevant. The guy is a licensed attorney. He has been an expert witness, retained as an expert witness over 750 times, and he's testified at trial as an expert witness over 100 times. That's the sum total of what we need to know about him, really. The pertinent parts. I don't need to go through his entire work history, but the document is on Court Listener if anyone is actually interested in all of that. Okay. As mentioned above, Sony's harassment policies applied to individuals performing services for Sony. The policy included conducting an investigation when Sony became aware of harassment allegations, yet Sony conducted no investigation as a result of the complaint. Right. Footnote: Miss Giannetti confirmed telling Miss Lively that Sony did not run the production, but this was in the context of a COVID issue which Miss Lively had raised. So what's he saying then? That in terms of COVID, so Sony couldn't have helped Blake Lively, but if given everything else that she was alleging, that Sony should have done something. Around the same time, another cast member, Miss Slate, also complained about harassment to Miss Giannetti. But no, he then references another female actor in the film, Isabella Farah, also testified that Miss Slate expressed frustrations or upsetness with Mr. Baldoni. Oh, yeah, but was Isabella Farah, did she witness that firsthand? Because Isabella Farah testified that Miss Slate expressed frustrations or upsetness. Did Isabella Farah actually witness anything happening firsthand, though? In deposition, Miss Giannetti confirmed this phone conversation with Miss Slate, in which Miss Slate expressed unease on the set, mentioning Miss Lively's concerns and her own experiences with Mr. Baldoni, making a hot comment to her. Also, these contributed to a tense atmosphere. I thought it was a sexy comment to Jenny Slate. I thought it was a sexy comment to Jenny Slate and Blake Lively, and the hot comments were to Isabella Farah and Blake Lively. Right, you've got another footnote here. In other words, it impacted her ability to perform her job. Miss Lively testified to how Mr. Baldoni's actions affected her job as well. Are they both trying to blame Justin Baldoni for being terrible actresses? Again, Sony conducted no investigation, and again, we have another footnote. Sony's failure to investigate meant that it fell into the studio to investigate, but the studio failed to do so. In the meantime, Miss Slate raised a complaint with Miss Sachs, a producer on the film. Miss Sachs testified that on that date, she had brunch with Miss Slate. Oh, sorry, I said lunch earlier. I meant brunch. Initially, she believed that it would be just a friendly brunch. Instead, Miss Slate complained about Mr. Baldoni, expressing discomfort about his making comments about her physical appearance. For example, saying that she was hot or sexy. That was Lively. I mean, it was wildly taken out of context, but the hot or sexy was Lively. Another footnote. Miss Slate played the sister of Mr. Baldoni's character in the film. It seems unlikely that Mr. Baldoni's character would refer to his sister's physical appearance as hot or sexy. No. Fuck's sake. He was also the fucking director. Which I think I've seen referenced, that pertinent point has only been referenced like maybe once in this entire report. In other words, it does not seem like the comment was related to Miss Slate's character in the film. Instead, it appears to be a personal comment about Miss Slate's appearance. No, it's the director talking about his fucking actress's wardrobe. Also, Miss Slate relayed that she was uncomfortable with Mr. Baldoni recording a creative Zoom meeting without prior consent. How is this sexual harassment? And in addition, Miss Slate expressed some discomfort relating to Mr. Heath. Yes, we all know what that is. She couldn't have sexy time in the place they got her, so Heath paid out a lot of money so Slate could continue her sexual acrobatics in a different apartment, although we were all led to believe it was for the safety of her child. Do you remember that? We all thought that it was a concern over the safety of her child, but the text, that's what she told Heath, right? I need a different apartment because this one is not safe for my child. But in the text messages between Lively and Slate, the real reason was because, they had to have the kid in the bed with them and they couldn't have sex. And then she went on to complain because Heath said something to the tune of, "We prioritize mothers." Ugh. Her own concerns aside, Miss Slate suggested that Miss Lively also had concerns. Miss Slate testified that she spoke to Miss Sachs about Mr. Heath's inappropriate comments. Another footnote, the timeline exhibit attached to Sarah's deposition indicates that Mr. Baldoni's comment to Miss Slate about being sexy, see, it keeps changing, occurred on May 18th, 2023. Also that she was offended by Mr. Baldoni's inappropriate recording, his comments about women, and his fussy attitude. Oh my god. When discussing someone's fussy attitude, Jenny Slate really should sit this one out. Oh, wow. Further, that she told Miss Sachs about impact on all of this. I think that's meant to say further that she told Miss Sachs about the impact of all of this on the work environment and that her work was suffering. As a result of the complaints Miss Slate had raised with Miss Sachs sent a text to Miss Giannetti suggesting that Mr. Baldoni be replaced as a director. Also, that Mr. Heath be kept off set. Additionally, right, I mean, there was they were trying to install Christy Hall as the director, and she wanted Heath off the set because she wanted to be the lead producer, and she was put out that she wasn't. He was. I mean, the guy is not doing a great investigation if he's not looking further into the motives here. Additionally, believing that Miss Slate was genuinely uncomfortable with Mr. Baldoni and with Mr. Heath, Miss Sachs relayed Miss Slate's concerns to Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath and spoke to them about conducting an investigation into Miss Slate's concerns. Miss Baldoni testified that Miss Sachs did talk to him about Miss Slate's discomfort with some of his actions. This included that Miss Slate had not appreciated a comment that he had made on set using the word sexy in reference to something she was wearing. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure it's confirmed in someone's deposition that Jenny Slate actually said she didn't think it was sexual harassment, she just didn't appreciate it. So despite these complaints and Miss Sachs's investigation recommendation, the studio did not conduct an investigation. Miss Sachs explained why. Specifically, that Mr. Heath told her that they had decided not to conduct an investigation into concerns about Mr. Baldoni's and his own behaviours because they didn't want a written record of it anywhere. Right. By contrast, Mr. Heath denied telling Miss Sachs that they did not want a written record, and so, as a result, that they were declining to conduct an investigation. So, as he said, she said. I'm not in a position to know whether Miss Sachs or Mr. Heath are telling the truth about this alleged explanation. Of course, if true, the explanation and failure are completely inappropriate, contrary to standard practices and the studio's own policies and procedures, but in any event, no investigation was conducted. In the meantime, according to Miss Sachs, the guys on set then started making comments about not being able to make eye contact anymore. She saw this as them making light of behaviors that made other employees uncomfortable. Um, On May 30th, Mr. Baldoni texted Miss Lively, writing, "I want you to know that I have been made aware of your concerns and I hear you. They are fully received and adjustments will be made imminently. Um, However, no investigation was conducted and the only adjustments which were made were not imminent." However, there's a footnote. However, Mr. Baldoni testified that he did cease hugging others on set. By this time, Miss Lively had spoken to Mr. Heath as well. Specifically, on the second day of filming, Mr. Heath had attempted to Mr. Heath had attempted to enter Miss Lively's trailer uninvited. She told him to wait a minute while she was getting undressed, but he insisted that he needed to meet with her right away, so she allowed him to come into the trailer so long as he faced the wall. Initially, he did. However, Mr. Heath stopped facing the wall because he wanted to make eye contact with Miss Lively while they were talking. At that moment, Miss Lively was removing body makeup and a wig. Miss Lively was nude from the waist up, i.e., with her breasts showing. She expressed discomfort, telling Mr. Heath that it was not okay for him to do this. Nevertheless, later, both Mr. Heath and Mr. Baldoni continued to enter her trailer uninvited. I have literally not heard another instance of Jamie Heath entering her trailer uninvited. And the one time we've heard that Justin Baldoni entered the trailer, there's a text message inviting him. I mean, he's citing the Lively deposition, so I can't wait to read that. And that is not a portion that we have to hand. In deposition, Mr. Baldoni admitted Miss Lively talking about Mr. Heath entering her trailer. From his point of view, as she was sharing the story, she did not seem upset. However, he understood that she did not want it to happen again, and nothing was reported to Human Resources. Also, according to Miss Lively, Mr. Heath had shown her a video of his wife naked giving birth. The video was completely out of context. She had asked Mr. Heath to stop showing it. And by this time, Mr. Baldoni had called her hot and told her she looked sexy. Right, we have a footnote. Miss Slate testified that when Mr. Baldoni called Miss Lively hot and then sexy, or vice versa, she told him that such comments were inappropriate and distracting, and we're just not doing this anymore. Mr. Baldoni admitted Miss Slate talking to him about this, and he admitted making the hot comment to Miss Lively, though his version is somewhat different to hers. Instead, he testified that he commented to Miss Lively that her outfit looks hot, to which she replied that's not what she was going for. Then he made a joke and said sex. No, that's wrong. He said sexy first, then he told her that then he said hot in reference to the room temperature. The great big bloody coat she was wearing. Oh, this guy he has not got accurate information in front of him. By this point, according to Mr. Baldoni, Miss Giannetti had told him about Miss Lively's discomfort with him, including his use of the word sexy to her. On June 1st, 2023, Miss Lively had a meeting with Miss Sachs, Mr. Baldoni, and Mr. Heath. As mentioned above, Miss Lively tried to bring these issues to Sony, but to no avail. So she intended to discuss it with her team. Intended to discuss with her team other avenues to address the issues and to ensure a safer set. Before she could do so, the June 1st meeting with Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath took place. Mr. Baldoni started the meeting by saying that Mr. Heath showing the naked video of his wife was not Mr. Heath's fault, it was Mr. Baldoni's fault, as he had asked Mr. Heath to show her the video. However, rather than promising that nothing like that would ever happen again, and rather than ensuring that she would have a safe set going forward, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath did not find their actions to be an issue. During the meeting, Miss Lively raised HR concerns for them. Okay. Footnote. The timeline exhibit attached to the Sarah's deposition indicates she raised HR concerns. Mr. Heath testified that the timeline was prepared at his direction beginning on June 17th, 2024, and was prepared with input from him and another studio employee at minimum. She expressed concerns about the improper sexual things that had occurred to her so far and delineated some of the improper actions as examples. She told them that their behavior had to stop. In response, Mr. Heath and Mr. Baldoni did not offer any HR people for her to call. Did she ask? They didn't say who was responsible for handling such HR issues, and there was no acknowledgement, apology, or reparations. Mr. Baldoni admitted the behavior but tried to justify it, explaining why it was okay, and that he tried to explain why she should not feel how she did about that which had occurred. Miss Lively felt that Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath did not take her concerns seriously. According to Miss Lively, she was never given any HR resources by the studio. But note, as mentioned above, if true, it is a failure to follow standard practices for preventing harassment and retaliation from occurring. That Miss Lively complained on June 1st is confirmed by text between Miss Sachs and Miss Giannetti. In it, Miss Sachs discussed the very good, tough chat with Blake. This included the wife photo and other comments by Miss Lively. Also, that Mr. Heath went to Miss Lively's trailer, and when she agreed that he could come in if he did not look at her, apparently he was looking in her direction the entire conversation when she turned around. Additionally, according to the timeline exhibit attached to the Sarah's deposition on June 1st, Blake took Alex, Justin, and Jamie to her trailer to discuss the complaints she had about them. These included the following: sexy comment, Heath, showing the birth scene, told Heath that he looked at her in the trailer. In deposition, Mr. Heath also talked about the June 1st meeting with Miss Lively. He explained that she complained about the sexy comment, the situation with him in her trailer, during which she had asked him not to look in her direction, and that she was nursing or feeding at the time. And about his showing her the video of his wife, nude from at least the waist up. I mean, she's going to be nude from the waist down. She's giving birth. Despite Miss Lively raising these harassment complaints, no investigation took place. But no. Miss Lively testified that she did not specifically request an investigation to take place. However, in my opinion, it is not the responsibility of the complaining party to ensure that the company follows its own policies and procedures as well as standard practices. Instead, it is up to the company, here the studio, to follow its own policies and procedures. So the company should conduct an investigation and then to take appropriate remedial and or disciplinary action. Also on June 1st, Mr. Baldoni responded in writing to Miss Slate's earlier complaint, stating, "I was made aware of your concerns. I wanted you to know that they are fully received. I hear you, and adjustments will be made accordingly." Another footnote. That is, of course, until after resumption of filming after the strikes, when the 17 protocols were submitted and ultimately agreed upon. And no investigation took place regarding the concerns raised by Miss Slate. On June 2nd, 2023, in a text exchange with her publicist, Alex Croton, Miss Slate wrote, "This movie is really full of huge issues. Like, Blake and I both made complaints to Sony regarding behavior. I think we should talk ASAP." As a result of all of the above, it is clear that the studio knew that many of the harassment issues had been raised, including by Miss Sachs, and by Miss Lively. As another example of this, in an August 14th, 2024 text exchange with a number of individuals, Katie Case wrote, "Hey guys, read the TMZ thing, read the HR complaint. Our understanding is that there were two from Blake and Jenny." We have two footnotes there. They're just saying Katie Case was PR with tag. TMZ is an entertainment news channel. Okay, clarifies all that. In the meantime, the production on the film temporarily halted in June 2023. This was as a result of the WGA strike, followed by the SAG-AFTRA strike. The WGA strike ended on September 27th, 2023, and the SAG-AFTRA strike ended on November 9th, 2023. Thereafter, the film resumed production. Footnote: production resumed around January 5th, 2024. Also on November 9th, 2023, Miss Lively's counsel sent a list of 17 proposed protections to Sony's counsel and the studio's counsel. As the film was set to resume production, those protections were designed to stop the harassment that had been taking place on the set, also designed to create a safe environment. As Miss Lively's counsel wrote, "It's no surprise to the film's producers. The experience of shooting the film has been deeply concerning on many levels. The complaints of our client and others have been repeatedly conveyed and well documented throughout pre-production and photography. The proposals prohibited certain specific inappropriate behaviors. As just a few examples, no touching and/or comments on Miss Lively's physical appearance except in connection with the character and scene work, not as to Miss Lively personally. Similarly, no discussions of personal experiences with sex and nudity. Also, not entering or attempting to enter Miss Lively's trailer while she is in a state of undress for any reason. Many other similar prohibitions were included. As a result of these proposals, as well as at least some of the complaints made above, there can be no doubt that the studio knew of Miss Lively's objections to the inappropriate sexual conduct that had been occurring on the set. Indeed, Mr. Sauer testified that Mr. Baldoni communicated to him that the document containing the 17 proposals insinuated that Mr. Baldoni was unsafe and sexually harassing. On November 10th, 2023, Michael Marshall at Sony commented on the proposals. Among other things, he wrote, "Further as discussed, overall the tone of the response has to be part denying the underlying insinuations and allegations, but doing so in a way that doesn't inflame or escalate further, since most of what's on the list, Wayfarer is acknowledging addressing." However, Sony did not suggest that an investigation into the insinuations/allegations take place, and neither Sony nor the studio conducted an investigation. On November 19th, 2023, the studio's counsel wrote, Wayfarer, Sony, and production respectfully acknowledge that your client has concerns regarding safety, professionalism, and workplace culture. Although our perspective differs in many respects, ensuring a safe environment for all involved is paramount, irrespective of differing viewpoints. Regarding your outlined requests, we find most of them not only reasonable but also essential to the benefit of all parties involved. As a result, an agreement was reached via a contractual rider, which was executed on January 19th, 2024. The agreement included 17 provisions. Most addressed Ms. Lively's harassment concerns. One prohibited retaliation for her raising such concerns. The 17th provision required at Miss Lively's election an all-hands in-person meeting before production resumed. Clearly, Through these agreed-upon provisions, the studio was well aware of Miss Lively's harassment concerns, yet still no investigation took place. On January 4th, 2024, the all-hands meeting took place at Miss Lively's house. Among others, Mr. Heath, Mr. Baldoni, Miss Sachs, and Miss Giannetti were there during the meeting, and many examples of inappropriate conduct were discussed. No more showing nude video. Oh God, are we going through? Oh, right, okay. No more showing nude videos or images of women, i.e. producers, including producers, i.e. Heath's wife, to Blake Lively and or her employees. No more mention to Blake Lively or her employees of personal times that physical consent was not given in sexual acts, as either the abuser or the abused. No more descriptions of their own genitalia to Blake Lively. No more jokes about disparaging comments to be made to Blake Lively and or her employees about HR complaints Wayfarer has already received on set or about missing the HR meeting. No more personal, physical touching of or sexual comments by Mr. Baldoni or Mr. Heath to be tolerated by Blake Lively and or any of her employees, as well as any female cast or crew without their express consent. No more improvising of kissing. Is this guy aware that she improvised plenty of kiss scenes and lip biting scenes? It's interesting that she's got this, actually, right? Just, again, sidebar. It's interesting that she's got this here, right? And this was read out on January the 4th at that meeting, right? Yet, that hospital scene where she's wearing that god-awful dress that people... So many people keep saying to me, I thought she was wearing a hospital gown. The one that is, like, you know, it's unbuttoned quite low, and you can see her bra in it. And she's come into the hospital and just to give Justin Baldoni something, and then she kisses him repeatedly and says, "I love you," off camera. Those kisses were unscripted, and yet they come in after this rider was put into effect. And it doesn't say that Justin Baldoni can't improvise kissing. It says no more improvising of kissing. So she has technically breached her own agreement. If we want to, you know, be quite play semantics on this, she's breached the agreement herself, because that hospital scene was filmed in phase 2. At which point we were already past this point here where she was demanding that there was no more improvising of kissing. She improvised kissing. No more attempting to enter, interrupting, pressuring, or asking Blake Lively to enter her trailer or the makeup trailer by Mr. Heath or Mr. Baldoni while she is nude for any reason. No more adding of sex scenes, oral sex, or on camera climaxing by Blake Lively outside the scope of the script Blake Lively approved when signing on to the project. I had struggled with that one too, because the script that she approved when she signed on was not the same script by the end of it anyway, because she also rewrote a lot of it. Her PGA letter. Oh, to confirm, I looked at the list of exhibits, by the way, that this guy had access to, and he also was not given the PGA letter. So there's that. So she was not giving out her PGA letter to, or any of the attached PGA support letters to 2 out of 2 of her experts whose reports we have now seen. In deposition, Mr. Baldoni admitted that at the all-hands meeting, Miss Lively relayed that he had made her feel unsafe. Mr. Baldoni admitted that during the all-hands meeting, Miss Lively had read a list from her phone. However, he disputed that some, but not all, of the items are alleged to have been raised at that meeting actually were relayed. Similarly, Mr. Heath testified that Miss Lively read at least a few items from her phone, possibly 9 or 10 items. However, based on what occurred during the all-hands meeting, it is clear that the studio was aware of at least some of the harassment allegations. Further, the studio was aware that Miss Lively contended that Mr. Baldoni had made her feel unsafe. But again, no investigation took place. Further, no disciplinary or remedial action took place as a result of any investigation. Mr. Heath explained why no investigation was conducted. He testified, "We did not determine it was necessary. We never come to the point to think that it was necessary because, in it, while she was expressing it, it was very confusing because she, i.e. Miss Lively, was not. It was almost like he was a child." Further, he explained that there was no conversation or decision made to not conduct an investigation. In other words, that the studio never even considered whether or not to conduct an investigation. In addition, Mr. Heath confirmed that he did not speak to the studio's human resources consultant about the incidents that Miss Lively raised. The trailer screening for the film took place on May 6, 2024. Margaret Colleen Hoover, the author of the book on which the film was based, had dinner that evening with Mr. Baldoni, Mr. Heath, and Miss Hoover's best friend. During the dinner, Mr. Baldoni made negative comments about Miss Lively. I believe what he did was say, "This is what my experience has been." This included that she was a narcissist and that she wanted to take over the film. Mr. Baldoni related that Miss Lively was making their lives very stressful during filming. Mr. Heath could not quite recall that dinner. Mr. Baldoni further explained that Miss Lively had a meeting that blindsided them about their behaviour. Further, that the result of the meeting was that she forced them to sign a document stating they wouldn't exhibit that behaviour anymore or she wouldn't resume filming. During the dinner, several incidents were described, including Mr. Heath going into Miss Lively's trailer while she was breastfeeding. Mr. Heath said that he feared she would file sexual harassment claims against him. Assuming Miss Hoover is telling the truth, there can be no doubt that both Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath understood that Miss Lively had raised sexual harassment claims, yet no investigation took place. As a result of all of this, the studio failed to enforce its own policies requiring investigations of harassment allegations. The studio failed to follow the training that was provided to those involved with the film, and the studio failed to follow standard practices as well. Despite the agreed upon prohibition on retaliation, Miss Lively alleges that thereafter, the defendants engaged in an extensive retaliation campaign designed to affect her reputation and career, including, among other things, by manipulating online narratives about her, including with respect to Miss Lively allegedly having a less than favourable reputation in the industry, and a clear, likely motive to bully her way into buying the rights for It Starts With Us, the sequel to the movie. Just to kind of remind everyone, Justin Baldoni said, even before the start of filming in phase 1, that she should probably direct It Starts With Us. That's in text messages. Footnotes. Ms. Lively also claims that when issues were raised with Mr. Baldoni during production, he would retaliate against her and others by responding in a happy manner. Similarly, Miss Slate testified that her experience with Mr. Baldoni was consistent with Miss Lively's description of his behaviour, including being happy and creating a negative atmosphere on set. Miss Lively testified that she first became aware of this campaign on August 9, 2024, the same day that the film was released. Is that when she first became aware that there was a campaign at the premiere? And that she has since experienced a groundswell of negativity. All right, okay. On December 20th, 2024, Lively filed a complaint with the California Civil Rights Department alleging harassment and retaliation. Ms. Lively alleged, among other things, that she suffered reputational damage as a result of the retaliation against her. This kind of alleged reputational damage is particularly problematic in the entertainment industry, which is unique in many ways. One of those ways relates to the ability of people in power, including, for example, directors, studio executives, and/or others with access to large amounts of money, to negatively impact the future careers of actors and other above-the-line individuals, such as directors and writers, etc. And it's fair to say that can work two ways. You know, when you've got your actress is Blake Lively, who is a producer, who's married to Ryan Reynolds, best friends with Taylor Swift, but, you know, has directors like Sean Levy as godfather to your children, has friends like Matt and Lucy Damon and Ben Affleck. Yeah, sure, I agree with this guy here. This can apply not only when the actor is performing services on a particular project, but can also impact the actor's future career, including future work opportunities and advancement. A career not involved in any way with the individual trying to destroy their career. And this can be true even for those actors that have experienced prior successes, are considered A-list, or have well-established networks in the industry. I wrote about this unique phenomenon in both of my published articles relating to conducting investigations in the entertainment industry. Another unique aspect of entertainment investigations is that other industries do not have power brokers like those in the entertainment industry. For example, if an employee raises harassment allegations at an insurance company and then decides to leave for another company, outside individuals will likely not have any power to affect that employee's ability to obtain a job at another insurance firm. In contrast, power brokers like Harvey Weinstein have the ability to affect people's careers even beyond the reach of their own projects. For example, an actor who refused to engage in sexual activity with a power broker might find their career destroyed, including on projects completely unrelated to the power broker. Although the entertainment industry appears to be changing for the better, fear of power brokers having a deleterious effect on careers remains a prominent concern even now, 5 years after the start of the Me Too movement and the public reckoning faced by many high-profile individuals and companies. These levels of influence and fear simply do not exist in any other industry. Um, okay. Do you know, I think, yeah, do you know what I'm gonna say this now in the middle of this. Let's just because they brought up Harvey Weinstein, right? And again, we often hear that Leslie Sloan's her company Vision PR is kind of was backed by Harvey Weinstein. We hear that a lot, and they're currently trying to curate the PR with Leslie Sloan's the attorney who represented Leslie Sloan in this trial, in this lawsuit, Sigrid McCauley. And there's this whole pomp about, oh, she represented the victims of Epstein, blah, 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 blah. And that's true, right? And I have commended her, like, much earlier on in this case when we were, before the dismissal, actually, I was talking about her on one of my videos, and I was, quite amazed and, at the brilliant job she'd done, recovering compensation for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. So 100% get behind that statement. However, she, Sigrid McCauley, who's now representing Blake Lively, um, which I find that is a bit of a sleight of hand, really, because technically she's always been part of the team, but she has specifically stepped into representing Blake Lively and not just Leslie Sloan. Um, The company she works for, Schiller, previously represented Harvey Weinstein. They had actually over 100 attorneys resign because of this. But it's always good to just remind ourselves, yes, great, she did great. The firm did great work against Jeffrey Epstein. Although in the Epstein files, there is an email that from one of the victims who suggested that she never actually received the compensation, and it specifically names Sigrid McCauley and David Boyce as the people who have stolen the compensation. Again, that's alleged. I do not know if that's true. I am just, talking about an email that did crop up as part of the released Epstein files, where one of the victims says that we never received compensation, and our lawyers stole it, and they specifically named Sigrid McCauley as one of those people. But it's always good to kind of just circle back whenever Harvey Weinstein and Me Too comes up, from Blake Lively's side, and to sort of say, oh, she's just another victim, to remind ourselves, not only did Blake Lively, support and adore Harvey Weinstein, not only did Harvey Weinstein back Blake Lively's publicist's business, they are using the very law firm that represented him in his sexual her abuse trials. So there's that. Okay. We are nearing the end of this. Okay, so he continues. I intend to discuss my views about the unique nature of the entertainment industry during the trial. The same day that Miss Lively submitted her CRD complaint, her counsel sent a cease and desist letter, like they couldn't have done that 2 years before, to the defendants, describing the harassment and retaliation experienced by Miss Lively and demanding that their retaliatory actions cease. The CRD was also included. See, this tells me, they didn't need HR to do something. She did not need HR. She got her lawyers to send the very thing she could have done from the outset when she first experienced the problem. And she didn't need someone to tell her, the HR processes for that. This woman is full of shit. Despite studio policies to investigate harassment and retaliation allegations, despite the training provided to those involved in the film, and despite standard practice to do so, once again, no investigation took place. To the contrary, instead of conducting a workplace investigation, Miss Lively contends that the retaliation campaign against her escalated. As a result, once again, the studio failed to follow standard practices and its own policies and procedures, and once again, the studio failed to follow the training that was given to those involved in the film. Once again, the studio did not take reasonable steps to prevent harassment and retaliation from occurring. Nudity rider and intimacy coordinator failures. I think there's only a few pages of this, and then we're at the end. As to nudity rider issues, in April 2023, a nudity rider was sent to Miss Lively. In May 2023, some exchanges took place with respect to the rider. However, Miss Lively did not sign the rider until January 2024. Interesting. We know that. In my opinion, it is the studio's and/or production company's responsibility to ensure that nudity riders are signed prior to any intimacy, including nudity or simulated nudity scenes being shot. However, that did not occur here. As Elizabeth Talbot, intimacy coordinator, testified, nudity riders need to be signed any time before the intimacy scene is shot. Also, the studio did establish close-set protocols. However, those protocols were not distributed until June 21st, 2023. In my opinion, those protocols should have been established and distributed in advance of any potential intimacy scenes. However, the protocols were not established or distributed in advance of the birthing scene, which, in my view, involved simulated nudity. That scene was filmed on May 22nd, 2023, so the studio did not follow standard practices for creating closed set protocols. Further, while the studio did establish belatedly closed set protocols, it did not create its own definitions of intimacy. Beyond all of this, my understanding is that at times Mr. Baldoni would improvise by adding additional sexual contact to some of the scenes after Miss Lively signed onto the movie. These improvised changes could have impacted both the content of the nudity rider as well as proper utilization of the intimacy coordinator. I'm not going to read all of that. Yeah, I'm not. I don't know, actually. That's humour me. Right. These improvised changes, my understanding is that while the studio retained an intimacy coordinator, problems exist with respect to how the studio actually utilized the services of that intimacy coordinator, at least prior to the adoption of the 17 protections discussed above. In this regard, in the first phase of production, i.e. before the union strikes and then adoption of the 17 protections, Elizabeth Talbot served as the intimacy coordinator on the film. As is normal practice, the studio controlled when the intimacy coordinator would be brought onto the set. The studio also controlled when the set would be closed. However, because the studio did not establish clear definitions of intimacy, no clear procedure was established as to when any particular scene involved intimacy. Again, just to remind everyone again, right, the use of an intimacy coordinator is not mandatory. It is a guideline that SAG-AFTRA recommends. And the rules were far more relaxed at the time of filming this scene than, they tightened up later that year. But at the time of shooting the birth scene, they were a lot more relaxed, and it was just only if there was some exposure of anything that was under a bikini. She was wearing flipping shorts. Nothing was exposed that would have been underneath a bikini. I mean, it's wild to say, oh, well, her legs were exposed. And that then impacted when the intimacy coordinator was brought onto the set and when the set would be closed. The birthing scene involved some simulated nudity. Having watched the scene, my opinion is that it involved intimacy issues. Let's read this. The footnote that goes with this. In part, this was because Miss Lively was put in a vulnerable position with legs spread and a male actor leaning in between her legs. It was an intimate, hyper-exposed scene. Also, because it involved simulated nudity. Beyond this, the intimacy coordinator, Miss Talbot, testified that she did not discuss the birthing scene with Miss Lively. This, despite the fact that the scene seemed to include a high hip line that, according to Miss Talbot, might be considered nudity by some actors. Further, as discussed above, Miss Talbot was not brought onto the set during the filming of that scene. I hope people do not hire Blake Lively to do a birth scene ever again, because she clearly can't cope with it. But Miss Talbot was not brought onto the set when that scene was filmed. Additionally, so far as I can tell, Miss Lively was not asked whether she would have been more comfortable with an intimacy coordinator present during the filming of the scene. And in addition, despite the scene being an intimacy scene, the set was not closed. In my opinion, all of this was a failure to properly use the services of the intimacy coordinator. Even before that scene, it is also my understanding that Miss Lively was asked whether she wanted to meet the intimacy coordinator in advance of production. This was in April 2023. She responded that a meeting in advance of production was not standard. No, she didn't. She said, "I'm fine. I'm good. Don't worry about it." I agree that generally it would not be standard at that point in time. However, my understanding is that what Miss Lively did not recognize when she was asked whether she wanted to meet in advance was that sexual content had been added in, beyond that which was contained in the script. For example, Mr. Baldoni testified that after Mr. Lively reviewed the script and then agreed to perform on the film, intimate scenes were worked on without his working with Miss Lively on those scenes. This was in order to make the film more sexual. In my opinion, the studio should have explained these changes, delineated the increases in intimacy scenes, and then asked Miss Lively whether she wished to meet with the intimacy coordinator. Mr. Baldoni, um, Mr. Baldoni testified that he did discuss some of the changes with the intimacy coordinator and ultimately with Miss Lively. And as to the improvised changes, i.e., those made at the time of filming, so far as I can tell, those improvised changes were not discussed with the intimacy coordinator and not discussed with or consented to by Miss Lively before being effectuated. That is because they were made by Miss Lively. That is because they were made by Mr. Baldoni instantly at the time the scenes were being filmed. Assuming all of this is true, I mean, again, I understood that Christy Hall added to the script at Sony's request as well. Assuming all of this is true, once again, my opinion is that the studio did not properly utilize the services of the intimacy coordinator. The dancing scene seems to be an example of Mr. Baldoni improvising during the shooting of the scene. Specifically, it appears that during filming he decided to add a level of intimacy to the scene that was not written into the script. This is a footnote here. Mr. Baldoni testified that he did not try to kiss Miss Lively during the scene. Reviewing the scene, it looks to me like that is exactly what he tried to do. I can see how Miss Lively might have been uncomfortable with the changes. Another footnote, her reactions during shooting seemed to show some discomfort. Has this guy seen her interviews? She looks the same in her interviews. In my opinion, the way to have created a safe environment would have been to offer Miss Lively an intimacy coordinator during the scene to ensure that she was comfortable and safe with the changes. So far as I can see, with no definition of intimacy, that did not occur here. The same should have applied with any other changes which increase the intimacy of a scene. Again, assuming all this is true, my opinion is that the studio did not properly utilize the services of an intimacy coordinator. Oh, we're getting to the end. For the above reasons, my opinion is that the studio did not follow standard practices with respect to the nudity rider and with respect to the utilization of an intimacy coordinator. Both of these are designed to prevent harassment from occurring and to help establish a safe set for all those involved. I'm not going to go through the attachments because they are so many pages, and we're kind of finished here now. I have looked at his exhibit list, and again, the one that stands out the most to me is the PGA letter is not in there. So, and again, just to reiterate, it is standard practice. This is quite normal for experts to be retained by a party and for that party to provide the evidence it chooses to. That is fine. The danger they run there is if they're not transparent and disclose everything, like, well, even the stuff that doesn't support them or contradicts them or whatever, then you run the risk of at trial or at a deposition, you know, the expert being kind of caught unaware. And then that starts creating holes in their testimony, and that becomes a problem. So it is always better to give everything to the expert, good, bad, and ugly, And, they can work it around, they can explain it's like what he's done with the fact that she didn't sign the nudity rider despite being given one. Oh, yes, she was given one, but she didn't sign it. He still, like, made it Wayfarer's problem that she had not signed it, at the time of the birthing scene. Despite that we've seen the emails, like, "Can you sign it? Can you sign it? Can you sign it?" So they were chasing her, they weren't just sitting there doing nothing about that, they were trying to get it back off her, and she did not sign it. And I don't agree that it should be entirely one person or one side's fault. Blake Lively, it's for her safety and for her benefit. Nudity riders, that's the whole point, is to keep the actors safe and work within their boundaries. So I do think that actually there is an obligation on Blake Lively. There is a responsibility on her to do everything she can. You cannot sit there and, ignore an instrument that you are given that would have helped give you some safety whilst performing your role on a film. You can't, you know, you're given the nudity rider and you chose not to do it despite the fact that its very purpose is to keep you safe. But now you're coming in and saying, "I didn't have a safe set." Some of that is down to Blake Lively because, there is a duty to mitigate. Um, and if stuff could have been prevented, you know, if uncomfortable experiences could have been prevented by her signing the rider, then why is she not signing the rider? It makes no sense to me at all. We all know she was hanging out because she wanted to lose weight, right? Because she was so body conscious. Fine. Then she could have just, been more upfront and honest about that. I don't I will also say I don't agree with this guy, characterizing the birth scene as I just don't agree that it needed, close sets and nudity riders and all that stuff, right? Showing someone's leg. When you look at the actual industry guidelines at the time, Wayfarer were compliant, so I think this guy's wrong. Where I do think he has made a reasonable argument, and, I know people don't wanna hear this, but I'm going to say it. Um, there's no denying, right, that w regardless of what you think of sexual harassment, do I think that that anything alleged by Blake Lively meets the definition of sexual harassment? Absolutely not. No. Um, n it's not the legal definition, no. Was she maybe a bit uncomfortable or pissed off that, you know, at the way Baldoni might have looked at her or something he said, or, to turn around and if Jamie Heath is looking at her while she's topless or looking through a mirror, because that story changed a lot. So I don't know what's true. That would be for the jury. But if he was at some point and he had turned round, even though he'd been asked to look at a wall, then if sh it does not matter what I think or what anyone else thinks. If she had said to him, "Look, I didn't like that. Don't do it again," then I this guy is actually he makes a point that he Wayfarer were aware that there were issues, that they were not things had happened that by their own procedures and policies should have actually triggered an investigation, but, I understand that they did not think it met the bar, but he has gone through quite well and said, "Actually, well, according to these text messages, according to this meeting, according to the lunch you had with Colleen Hoover, da 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 da," all of these points where you, almost acknowledged these people weren't happy or they you'd made someone feel unsafe or, you know, y they'd flagged something about your behavior, which you then text and said, "I will adjust." All of these things technically, just by Wayfarer's own policies, should have triggered an investigation in theory. He's not entirely wrong there. I think the message from Steve Sarowitz is problematic though. I do think that's problematic. That is not a good thing to say, because because Steve Sarowitz is not on set, so he hasn't heard what's happened. He hasn't seen what's happened. He's not like a first-hand witness. He's having a version of the story relayed to him by Justin Baldoni, right? Now, but Justin Baldoni is one party in this. He has not heard from Blake Lively, or heard her story, heard from anyone else who might have witnessed, overheard any incident. So to kind of then send a message back to someone who's been accused, rightly or wrongly, of sexual harassment, well, should I come over there and remind her who's paying her wages? That is an awful look. As much as I love Steve Sarowitz, that it's not going to go down well. It's not going to sit well with a jury. Okay, this was a really long read, and I'm going to go and rest my voice because I still have a long Josh Greenstein deposition transcript to do. I will be back later. Yeah, I kept saying, sorry, in my videos yesterday, I kept saying Warren Zavala deposition transcript. It's not, it's Josh Greenstein. Someone reminded me in the comments yesterday, so thank you to that person. All right, I will be back later. Take care, guys.